This morning we continue our series, Welcome Home, talking about hospitality for these next few weeks. We've been in a bit of a heat wave here in the RGV. They call this, the weather people call this like a heat dome. Apparently all the heat is trapped here in the valley. Like we need any more heat here in the valley. This already is the community with the highest annual temperatures in the United States. Not like we need any help with the heat. You know, about a month ago, it was already starting to get this hot, and some of you were there, but we did the annual graduation bottled water giveaway. We were giving away bottled water at the graduation. We've been doing this for a number of years. We're now kind of known as the bottled water church. We've given away so many bottles of water, thousands of bottles of water over the past few years. But we do it at graduation. Graduation is typically where, it's starting to heat up. And invariably, whenever we do this, especially in these public places, there's the question, why are you doing this? Why are you giving away water? And it happened the first time we actually did this, and it still happens. And you know what the answer is every single time? The answer is, we're giving away water because, well, this is deep South Texas, it's hot, and you're thirsty. In fact, again, a few weeks ago, a lady said this and asked that question, and that's what I said. And she took her water and just kind of chuckled and walked away. People don't know what to do with that. People aren't used to that kind of generosity. I'm not used to giving away things just because. Hospitality just because. That kind of generosity makes people uncomfortable. It's always been this way with that kind of generosity. At the very beginning of our Bibles in Genesis, all the way through to the book of Revelation, all the way to the end, God is constantly showing generosity to people. And He's constantly giving generosity where you wouldn't expect generosity, and He's giving generosity just because. He gives generosity to Adam and Eve. He gives generosity to Abraham, Noah, and David, and Solomon, and Moses. You start to look at all the different characters throughout the Old Testament. God's constantly providing generosity, and He's giving it in abundance. And He's giving it just because. Just because. You get to the New Testament, and Jesus is providing some generosity and hospitality. Jesus is constantly eating with sinners. He's constantly eating with sinners, outcasts, prostitutes, loan sharks. He eats with sinners, people that you would not expect God's generosity. He's giving plenty of it. People don't deserve it, let alone having Jesus or God in their presence. And Jesus also eats with the very religious, and that's where our story happens today. Luke chapter 14. There are some very hard things for us in Luke 14, in the story that Jacob just read. In fact, with this particular story, it's very easy for us to come to this story, and one way that we kind of mute some of the hard things that are going on in this story is we moralize it. And all of a sudden, this is providing hospitality for people who need it. Like Jesus is telling the story so that we would see that there are people around us that need hospitality, and we need to go out of our way to make sure that they feel welcome. Now, there's a little bit of that going on here, but if that's the point that we get from this, we're going to miss what Jesus is really doing with this particular story. Jesus is eating a meal with the very religious. So He's eating with the conference speakers of His day. The guys that have the podcasts. The ones who have the best-selling books on Amazon. Those who follow all the rules, they lead upstanding lives, they're very moral people. They're also very self-righteous. They believe they've got the keys to the kingdom, and as clear as anyone can tell, especially by reading the Old Testament, maybe they do have the keys to the kingdom. And they believe that God's kingdom is going to come through them because they're on their best behavior. Jesus is at their table eating their food. And in this meal, as he is eating with the religious establishment, Jesus begins to kind of poke at some of the things and some of the assumptions that are going on with the people who are at that meal. Well, the first thing he does, it happens to be the Sabbath, and he heals a guy. Well, that causes a stir. We don't heal people on the Sabbath, do we? It's kind of ironic just to even ask that question. That causes a stir. That causes conversation. And so Jesus, as he is doing stuff that's outside the box, he tells a story like he always does. And this story happens to be about a meal, a banquet, the one that Jacob just read. So Jesus is at a meal, telling a story about a meal. It's a teaching moment for him. Jesus has already noticed that the people that showed up were jockeying for position to see who was going to get the most important seat at the table. You ever been there, done that? Always make sure you're at the big boys' table and you're not going to get shoved down to the kids' table. That was me. Right? Jesus gives them a word of caution. And one of the religious leaders, in response to Jesus, says this: "Blessed is the one who will eat bread in the kingdom of God." Now that is a true statement. Blessed are those that are going to eat bread in the kingdom of God. But based on everything that has happened, this is this guy's way of just kind of muting Jesus. It's not exactly an insult, but he is coming alongside Jesus, trying to kind of correct where Jesus, he knows where Jesus seems to be going. Blessed are those who are on their best behavior. They're going to eat bread. I mean, that's what they're all thinking. Well, Jesus hears this and he tells this story. And this story is full of stuff that is going to make them very uncomfortable. It's an interesting story. A host throws a banquet. He invites his best friends, invites people that you would think are supposed to be there, and they say, I can't make it. I'm sorry, I just bought a field. I'm sorry, I just bought some oxen. I've got to go test drive these things. I'm sorry, I just got married. Wow, okay. Can't make it. And as the story Jesus is telling, the master, the guy that's throwing the party, says, he's not happy. In fact, he's angry. All he's getting are excuses. So this is what he then says. The servants need to go, and we're going to find people who appreciate the banquet. So he says, go out quickly into the streets and alleys of the city. Bring in here the poor, the maimed, the blind, and the lame. Uh-oh. Remember that passage in Leviticus we read where the poor, the blind, and the lame, they weren't really allowed into God's presence? Well, Jesus is telling a story where they get to eat at the table. The guest list has changed, and it's changed dramatically. Everything was good with these guys, but then Jesus mentioned the poor, the blind, and the lame, and you can probably hear a pin drop in that room. I mean, this is the exact same phrase, not only in that passage that we read in Leviticus. Jesus has already chastised them. These are the people they haven't invited to the meal that he's eating at. And now he's pulling them into the story. You see, their hospitality did not include the outcasts. And if you were part of the in crowd, you didn't hang with those people because of passages like that in Leviticus. You didn't hang with the poor. You didn't hang with the maimed. You didn't hang with those who were blind. Those people are icky. You're getting yourself dirty. So when Jesus tells this story, and here we have this guy throwing the party in the story, and these are the people who he's inviting. Oh boy. people sitting there listening to Jesus realize they are now in the crosshairs. He's not saying anything that's very nice to them. In fact, the way Jesus frames this story, when it comes to the kingdom, those who thought they were the gatekeepers of God's kingdom all of a sudden realize they're on the outside looking in. They might not be at this banquet. But Jesus doesn't stop there. There's a couple of things that are going on in this passage. It's very easy for us to read right through this and miss Jesus' language here. But I think this is what he's getting at. You know, Jesus doesn't just simply make a point, he drives the point home. He continues his story, he kicks it up a notch. In the story, the guy throwing the party is rebuffed. They go out and invite some. There are some people at the table, but there is more room. And so this is what Jesus says. He says, go out into highways and hedges. So he's expanding the scope of the invitation. And then he says this, so that my house may be filled. And again, people that are listening to this are getting very, very uncomfortable because now Jesus isn't simply saying, oh, we're going to look for these people and fill the table with these people. He's going to fill the house with these people. And not only is he going to fill the house with the poor, the maimed, the lame, and the blind, he's going to fill it until it's overflowing and there's no more room for anybody else. You get the sense that when Jesus is done with this story, that the only people at this banquet, the only people at this table, the only people in his house are the poor, the maimed, the lame, and the blind. There's no room for anybody else. The only people who are going to be at this banquet are those who are the outcasts, the unwelcome, the unloved. Only those who have something dreadfully wrong with them. And the meaning is clear now to all those who are sitting at this table. Again, this story started with, blessed is the one who will eat bread in the kingdom of God. And in this story, the only ones eating bread in the kingdom of God are the poor, the lame, the maimed, and the blind. Those are the ones eating bread. The ones who have been unfit for God's kingdom. You know, it hadn't been long before this that these very same religious leaders had thrown the accusation at Jesus that he only eats with sinners. And this story is, you know what? You're right. I only eat with sinners. Sinners are the only ones who are allowed to my table. Sinners are the only ones who are going to be in my house. You see, Jesus is always eating with sinners because those are the only people who are going to be in his kingdom. Jesus only eats with those whose lives are filled with immorality, breaking God's commands. You see, the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind, in this story is all of us. All of us. And it's not those who think they're in. It's those who don't deserve to be there at all. Those are the only people that are going to be at the table and in the house. You see, those who Jesus is eating with, these religious leaders, thought they were the gatekeepers of the kingdom. They wanted all the blessings, they wanted all the benefits, they wanted all that the kingdom has to offer, but they don't want Jesus. And Jesus is telling the story, and he is saying, you can't have the kingdom unless you have me. There is no kingdom unless you have me. And those that want me, guess who? Sinners, outcasts, the poor, the maimed, the lame, and the blind. There's one more thing here, and I didn't see this until a few weeks ago. It's kind of funny. This is one of my all-time favorite stories, and I didn't see this, but this this is where Jesus is going with all of this. He's filling his house with sinners. He's filling his table with sinners. But Jesus started this whole story with this. When you host a banquet, invite those who are poor, maimed, lame, or blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you. Why is it that Jesus' house and his table are filled with only the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind, sinners, the outcasts? Why is that? Because they can't repay. They can't repay. There's no possibility of paying. There's no capacity. This is Jesus' hospitality just at the cause. It's called no reciprocity, and that's a fancy word for saying there's nothing coming back to us. There's nothing reciprocal. I'm not expecting anything. And you know what? There is nothing we owe or we could pay to get to that table, to be in the house. There's no way we'll pay. God fills his house with sinners who can never pay him back, ever. Those are the people he invites to his table. One of my favorite Simpson episodes. It's the story of Bart. Bart's been studying for a test. Bart studies for this test, and he realizes he gets to the end of the day, and he is not going to pass the test. He struggles. And so he gets down on his knees, he gets beside his bed, and he prays, God, give me a day. Bring some snow tonight. Maybe there's a power outage. Do something tonight. I need a miracle. I need another day to study. And you know what happens? He goes to bed the next morning, wakes up. It was snowed. And it's a snow day. So all the kids, they go rushing outside. They start playing. And of course, there goes Bart. He's got the sled on his back. Got all his gear on. He's headed out the door, and standing in the doorway is Lisa, sister. And Lisa said, you're not going anywhere. I heard your prayer. And her comment is, you owe God big. It's a fascinating line. Because that's the way we approach God. We're taught that we owe God big. There's a half-truth to this. There's partial truth to this. We do owe God. There's no way Bart or anybody else is ever going to be able to pay what is owed. And that's where our thinking goes off the rails. I don't know how many times when I was in a youth group growing up, and I grew up in church, I was in a youth group, and either the youth pastor, the preacher, somebody's up there, and the comment gets made, Jesus died for you, you owe him your life. Jesus died for you, you owe him big. And the assumption is, here's what Jesus has done for you, now you owe. And the reality is, no matter how hard I try, no matter how hard we work, no matter what great Christian life we're living, there is no way ever that we're ever going to live up to what we owe. In fact, I found that to be an absolutely severe standard that Jesus died for me and now I owe him, and I found I couldn't pay it. Ever. There is no amount of obedience, even as a Christian, that is going to pay back what I owe to Jesus. You see, this isn't just Lisa's view of God, this is our view of God. We think we can pay him back. And the reality is, Jesus has already provided for us his table, his house, his gathering, where he gives his generosity just because. He's brought you here just because. He loves you. He wants you here. He wants you at his table. There's zero chance that we're ever going to live up to this, or this. So we come in faith because Jesus is filling his table, he's filling his house with people who cannot pay him back. The message is clear. He said the kingdom is not for people who pride themselves on how good they are. The kingdom is for people who don't deserve it. And Jesus is using this kind of hospitality to expand that kingdom. You know what the fascinating thing I find about this particular story is that ultimately Jesus is going to use the people who are poor, maimed, lame, and blind to bring more people in who are poor, maimed, lame, and blind. He is expanding his kingdom using sinners who bring other sinners to the table. Other sinners, filling his house with, well, guess what? More sinners. More sinners. If you walk through those doors today expecting to find people with their lives all clean, up in shape, that's someone else coming. We're sinners. Precisely the people that Jesus wants at his table, precisely the people that Jesus wants in his house. Twice in this story, Jesus used the word go out. Go out into the streets and alleys. Go out into the highways and hedges and bring them in. That is our mission. It's hospitality on mission. It's hospitality for the world. Jesus using us sinners to bring more sinners to the table. Bring more sinners to fill his house. That is his generous hospitality for us and for our community.